Today, we are welcoming Charles Marsala to the Ask JP podcast as the first person in our Talk to the Candidate series. And in these brief, kind of short form interviews, we're going to ask a series of questions, Monet and I, get your take on the 94 race, kind of, and some of the things around some of the, real nitty gritty stuff, and just give you an opportunity to talk to a different audience you may not normally speak to, because as you know, these days, a lot of kids are on the internets with the YouTubes and the podcasts and such. So this is going to be a non-traditional audience, people who are typically very well-informed voters who go the extra mile. So Charles, welcome to the Ask JP podcast, and Monet has your first question.
Perfect. All right, let's get this started. All right, we're going to start with just some questions about you, Charles, and why you decided to run in the first place. So, why did you decide to run for the state legislature?
Well, I have been politically active since I was in grammar school, actually. I grew up in Metairie. Actually was born in New Orleans, and then when I was about 7, we moved out to Metairie, which is on the west end of the district where I lived. And then I went to St. Francis. I worked at East Jefferson Hospital. I went to Jesuit and then Tulane. When I was at Jesuit, I was student council president.
Oh, okay.
And actually, my classmate was Mitch Landrieu. So it was a very interesting class. I went on to Tulane, became an engineer. I went out to California to drill for oil and learn the training program. In the mid-'80s, there was an oil bust. So I was never sent back. So the company had an office in Lafayette and an office in New Orleans, and then they basically laid everybody off. I opted to stay out there, and I got a job managing 8 Western states. I was transferred to Silicon Valley, and I became actually, in a weird, different way, is I was on the art committee. I was a wildlife photographer as a hobby because I was traveling the Northwest, and I ended up getting on the art committee from there to Park and Rec, and from there to City Council and Mayor. So I've had political interest my whole life. When I was in the Boy Scouts, citizenship in the nation and community were 2 of my favorite merit badges. So I came back here, and you see things being done differently with a different set of eyes when you leave. If you go away to college, you do certain other things, you come back and you go, maybe we should look at this, maybe we should look at that. And then also there are issues going on in the neighborhood that I live, and I'm thinking I have some expertise that I think would help the neighborhood. And they helped the city of New Orleans, helped the state of Louisiana. And that made me decide to go ahead and enter the race.
Okay. What makes you believe you're the best candidate, the best person to represent District 94? You kind of gave a little overview of like your background, but maybe dig a little deeper. What is the current state of District 94? What is your vision and how you change how District 94 is represented?
Well, one of the things I believe living where I live in the marina, and insurance rates are, and I know that's a topic we're going to talk more later, and I'll wait till we get there. But I've been hit hard with insurance rates, and everybody right now we see in New Orleans is talking about property tax problems. Again, taking something I learned in California, we had Prop 13 out there, and it maximized the amount the state could increase property taxes to about 1.25% a year. So I see here, and that was to protect seniors from losing their house. So as I'm back here, and I'm not too far away from that part of life, you realize a lot of people are going, you guys at the city council level are trying to deal with these property tax increases. We might start losing people by the time we hit them with property tax increases and insurance increases. I think that I could look at those situations and help us make sure that we don't go crazy with these increases, that we keep these people, which is one of our other questions. I also, as an engineer, look at, we're going to be talking about flooding. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I worked on drainage problems and other issues that are impacting everything. Engineering is key. We don't really have a lot of engineers that run for public office. So that is unique about me, that I bring the talents of an engineer to look at. Also, one of my thoughts is, and I'm going to talk about property taxes when we get to bills that I would introduce. So that's one of the other issues that I have. But I feel like I know this area because I lived and grew up in Jefferson Parish. I've lived in Orleans now for 6 years and see what some of our issues are. I was also, being out there, I did go to the Stanford Executive Program. I was involved at the state level. I received one of 3 Leadership and Action Awards out of 2,500 city council members in 2009. I learned a lot about what it's worked to work with people. I was on the 2006 bipartisan leadership team for the state, which was 90 people, Democrats and Republicans working together. And we had, things right now I think we feel are polarized. So I think I could bring the attitude that we don't need to be polarized to the table as well.
Okay, Monet?
Yeah, it's interesting that you have engineering in your background. One of my favorite presidents, Jimmy Carter, was an engineer in the Navy, so it comes in handy.
I am very familiar. I was a big fan of, still am a big fan of Jimmy Carter, and I thank you for pointing that out. He's one of the few that made it. When he did, I was like, that's so cool that an engineer, made it to be the president of the United States. We don't see that often. And when we think about what we're facing, like whether it be diversion projects and so many drainage projects, engineering is what a lot of the government is overseeing at the state level, at the local level. So being an engineer and thinking about some of the challenges that we would face on any projects, I think is a set of eyes you would want on a committee.
Definitely, definitely. And this kind of leads into our next question of you touched a bit on drainage, but what do you see as the main needs of the constituency you're looking to represent in 94?
So one of the things, and another reason why I got involved, is I lived out here 6 years, and I was actually cleaning up the place. It still had not been finished since Katrina, so I actually done a little bit of work on that. I started going to meetings because we're looking at one of the initiatives is what to do with West End right now. And as I started going out there and walking the grounds and really getting a feel for what those 4 acres that butt up against Lake Pontchartrain look like and why they haven't been fixed in 20 years, I saw that the sewer lines were running. 500,000 gallons of fresh water was being pumped in the West End a day since Hurricane Katrina. So one of the things I did was I tried to get some media attention. I called Sewage and Water Board. They didn't respond. I thought they would. Then I had a friend who does a little bit of video. He came out. We took that. We sent it to Channel 8. Rob Marsala came out. And that night, Sewage and Water Board showed up and announced that they would have it fixed in 20 days because they had to order the valves. So I look at Sewage and Water Board right now, and we have the flooding. We seem to have maybe some low-hanging fruit where once mine got fixed, people were emailing me, hey, we got a freshwater problem here by, in Hollywood Grove, and they won't fix that either. I think you really need to start monitoring the fresh water situation to make sure we are not spilling thousands of gallons a day from a broken pipe. That would be a first. And also, that undermines the roads. When you drive around here, we have a lot of potholes. The potholes are coming from a lot of these pipes are so antiquated that they're bursting. So, we can look at 2 parts there to the problem. And then you need to look at how do we deal with the flooding issue on the backside of the drains cleaned. I mean, that was amazing when we found out that there was Mardi Gras beads blocking drains a few years ago. I know we now pay more attention that we're cycling through to clean the drains, but I've been coming, as JP would know, I show up at a lot of city council meetings. So I've been paying attention to a lot of these issues. And I think because of that, I could have some input, even at the airport. There's some, that airport was moved from along the river, which is harder ground, to out in Kenner, out towards Veterans, which is softer ground. And we need to be paying attention to the infrastructure of the airport and monitoring that it's not sinking the runways. So I believe that I would use my engineering skills to address a lot of Sewage and Water Board issues.
Well, that's a great lead-in. So obviously BGR released that very extensive report over the state of the Sewage and Water Board. The Sewage and Water Board is actually, it's called quasi-state, but it's really a state agency. It's a state agency that the legislature created. It's governed by the legislature. It just so happens that it's funded through local tax dollars and the mayor appoints everyone on it. And based on that Sewage and Water Board report, what would you do as a legislator to try and improve both structurally or in even more specific ways how the Sewage and Water Board currently operates?
I'll be quick and honest with you there. I have not actually delved into that report. So I do need to do that. You brought something to my attention there. But on the outside, what I can see right away is as a state agency, we need more state accountability. And when the flooding happened, I guess that was 6 years ago when we had the White Linen Night flood, and I went to that meeting. We didn't see the participation from the mayor's office at that time into that board. And then we had a period there where Mayor Cantrell was delayed taking office till May with hurricane season coming up before she could begin researching and appointing people. So as a state agency, the state should have more like almost like City Park, where you would have more people appointed by the state to be sitting on there to help the Sewage and Water Board. And also when you do that, you get best practices, like certain things we did in California. You get different set of eyes, and you realize you don't have to do things the same way you've always done them. That would be a big thing. And again, some of these other issues would mean, where do we monitor these freshwater leaks, like the 311 calls? How are we responding and logging where we have, and how much is that costing us when you have that much fresh water flowing freely in the city of New Orleans? Could look at that. We could look at the side effects and how it works with interagencies, meaning, like, as I said, the leaking pipes are causing road damage. So we're putting a bill onto Public Works that really should be addressed before it gets to that problem, and have a comprehensive solution as well. So you'd want to interact with the other departments to solve some of the Sewage and Water Board issues.
Yeah, I think a good place to find kind of the state of Sewage and Water Board, and a lot of people don't know this, but we did some reforms in the legislature that I authored in, I want to say 16 and 19. I could be wrong, could be 15 and 18, but we incorporated a lot of best practices as far as an engineer has to be on the Sewage and Water Board. So many engineers, so many people with specific backgrounds. The challenge with that organization really resides in the fact it's got a culture problem, because even when you have people who have expertise on the board doesn't challenge the leadership at Sewage and Water Board. So though we have current and retired engineers on the board, people who have a background like yourself, some of the issues you're pointing out, they're kind of no-brainers for a mechanical engineer. Like, why aren't we reserved? So it's one of those things where I'd encourage you to read the BGR report. It's not the end-all, be-all, because really it doesn't come back with a hard recommendation. It just says, hey, we do something. So, I mean, it's a good first read, but I mean, it's really an issue of looking at it from a different perspective and seeing, I think with what many council members and legislators agree at this point is, we've tried to nibble around the edges on Sewage and Water Board, like tried to pull levers, and there hasn't really been a change. And maybe there might need to be a more significant lever, if not a stick of dynamite thrown in there to blow the whole thing up and just start over. Because at this point, but I know Monet's got a different question. We could spend this whole thing on Sewage and Water Board because it's such a hot mess.
If I could add there, JP, I know in your terms at the council, I'm not sure how many sticks of dynamite you got left, because you've thrown a lot of dynamite.
I throw a lot of dynamite. I mean,
he does throw a lot of dynamite.
And I admire you for that. I'm giving you a compliment here.
No, I mean, I wish I had to throw less dynamite. So, Monet, what you got next?
Okay, so and we'll definitely link the BGR report down in the description of this video for all the listeners and viewers out there. But we've talked a lot about drainage and flooding. I just got one more question. We've talked a lot about like the ins and outs, and obviously your engineering degree would help in kind of figuring out those logistical situations. But how do you, as your authority as a state legislator, plan to advocate for drainage projects to come to District 94? We have a lot of hard times trying to get the state to spend more money and bring more money to New Orleans. So how would you take on that?
Well, it's an interesting thought there, and I will go back to one thing. I haven't agreed with Mitch Landrieu on everything, but Mitch and I were in the same homeroom at Jesuit. So I've known him for 5 years. We graduated together. I actually ran against his best friend for student council president. That was Judge Federoff's son. So we did a lot of stuff together. And right now, New Orleans and Louisiana, what an asset we have to have Mitch as the czar. So, there's all that infrastructure money. I do, one of my things I do is I'm actually the president of the Italian American Federation of the Southeast. I just got a grant of $9,000 from the state to do a function in New Orleans. And I'm familiar with the grants. I mean, as a previous council member for 8 years, I know that where there's grant opportunity, and we see Jefferson Parish got $15 million to redo part of Bucktown. So when we look at where we're going to get that money, we need to look at what's at the local level in Louisiana. But I think, we also should be very effective with going outside of Louisiana and being able to obtain some grant money. There is obviously the BP oil spill money. We know we got $2 billion going in the Mid-Barrett area situation. New Orleans clearly is the hub of Louisiana. Excuse me. So everything, people when they come here, they come to New Orleans first. They fly into New Orleans and then they go elsewhere. We need to make sure that New Orleans is solid so that we get those people in, and then they can do the rest of the state. One of the things I think is you would work with is get that priority going so that New Orleans is getting some of the money it needs to stay around. And the port serves the whole country, and we have other issues that we serve the whole country in, whether it be oil and gas, shrimping, seafood, so many other things. We need to be given priority to make sure that the country is not subsidizing, but paying their fair share to keep New Orleans in business, so that when their goods ship out of here, they have the right means to get them out.
I think speaking about legislative roles, obviously one of the biggest issues facing the legislature in the state is homeowners insurance. It has reached a peak to the point where it has become a significant obstacle in either purchasing a house or keeping a house. And it's a unique issue because really, other than the insurance commissioner, and I'd like to remind our listening audience, I think Donilon was our first insurance commissioner in 30 years to not either leave office going to jail or under suspicion or investigation for an indictment. And we have a very bad reputation when it comes to insurance of all types, particularly homeowners and auto insurance across the United States. As a legislator, what do you think the solution is, or what would you advocate for as a solution for homeowners insurance?
JP, you're right on there. I actually 2 nights ago was at the NAACP meeting, and they only had one question that they would ask, and that was it. What are we going to do about the insurance? Homeowners are having trouble. So as I've been researching this, and I live outside the flood protection wall, so I'm really getting hit hard out here. We need to see if we can fix, and again, until I start negotiating with insurance agencies or bringing it up, I may be speaking ahead of myself here, but what about reinforcement? What about reinforcement of roofs and figuring out where the damage has occurred, and how do we make certain structures more stable? Because, like, again, out in California, we were seismic zone 4, and I sold a product that went into hangars for the air bases and airlines. We were told how to design it so that it was going to resist an earthquake. Then the insurance is low because you're meeting a standard for what is needed to do for the structure. So if we could I know one of the things is roofs get blown off. If you reinforce the roof, and the other thought I have here, which I think does tie into one of the other questions you have, is bills to produce. California has Prop 13. They've had it since the 1970s. You limit property taxes to 1.25% a year increase. So if we start taking property taxes and cap them so that people aren't getting hit with these hard property taxes, we might look at moving some of that money into reinforcing their houses or giving them tax credits on their houses so that they can lower their insurance bills. Because we know that now the cost, everybody's stereos and computers, refrigerators, when we get hit, the insurance companies are writing large checks. So I can understand if you're on their side, they're thinking, why do I want to be in that business anymore? It's become too expensive. We would need to look at how we reinforce the structures. I'm actually 12 feet in the air. Do I need to be paying high premiums because all my appliances are so high? I've really never had, and I got a $50,000 deductible. You know, what good does that do me when I get a foot of water? I got no damage, but yet I'm paying $15,000 a year for insurance.
I mean, I think that's an interesting point. I know that legislators took a swing at the building code. We did revisions in the 2010s, but we're so far behind the rest of the Gulf Coast that I think when we updated in the 2010s, we were updating to like the 1980s or 90s standards. So building code is certainly an issue. It's a challenging issue. I think it's worth taking a look at, but I mean, that's certainly an option. Monet, why don't we ask 2 more questions and then we'll keep this so why don't you pick one of them and I'll pick the last one.
All right.
Actually, you should, because you're a Zoomer, you should ask that college graduate question.
Okay.
I'm stuck here, so you have to ask the question for the young people.
That's fair. Although I'm stuck here too. Don't plan on moving
Yeah,
anywhere.
you're less
So,
stuck here. They have kids yet. You're not
maybe
full
you're
stuck
more
here.
stuck here through elected office. That's true. This is a question that actually kind of hits home to me because my sister is in college right now at LSU nursing, and she always talks about, I can't wait till I graduate, get some money, and leave Louisiana. It's a sentiment that I hear very often from people my age. So what would you say to a recent college graduate from Louisiana that's wondering why should they stay?
I have an interesting perspective on that because I did leave, and I had not planned to leave. I went out there looking to take a year of training and then come back to work in the Gulf. And then it turned out the oil and gas industry ended, and my friends were telling me, don't come back. So that was the mid 80s. And now we are here today. But I know when I was out there, maybe my perspective is I used to have two big parties a year at my house. And one was called San Gennaro with the Mardi Gras twist. And that was my summer party. And my other one was Papa Noel's Cajun Christmas party. So you don't get New Orleans. And we heard that so many times. Connick's song, do you know what it means to miss New Orleans? A Louis Armstrong song, excuse me. But Connick kind of made it famous in my generation. New Orleans has our family here. There's some values here that being out of the state, you don't really replace. There's a lot of culture here. So I came back not needing to, but I felt that draw that this really was where my heart was after 30 years. And I think if you're talking to somebody, we need to create that opportunity. That was one of the other things I think I brought to the table is that there are a lot of firms that are moving overseas. And I helped to design their plants to leave California to go overseas or go to India. We need to make it not so much answering them, but we need to work with them. And we need to be approaching those companies that are going to India or going to other places to come to Louisiana. We got great education here. We say we don't, but if you look at how many great colleges we have, there is a large pool of talent. So why aren't we trying to tap into the people that are going to India or other places to manufacture to say, Louisiana has a place for you. And that way we keep our people. We also point out some, the great things that we have. I mean, we do have the Saints and music festivals. I have so many friends actually in LA. Somebody just told me that comes here frequently. And she said she gets in her house, drives to her office, comes home, doesn't meet anybody. When she comes out here, she's the Italian leader of LA and sees our stuff. She's like, you guys have friends. You do things together. So that's one of the things that Louisiana has where we don't deal with the snow. We don't go run indoors. We are out nonstop socializing. And it's just a great feeling to your heart to have friendships. And that would be, I think, the biggest thing I would say is that, we can make the jobs come back and we can keep the culture that bonds us together.
Okay. The last question, which I think is kind of also like a great closing, is what are the specific needs as someone who is a constituent in 1994 currently? What are the unmet needs of constituents that are not being covered that you are going to cover should you be successful?
Well, that was it's a great question. And I'll start with one that's a microcosm right now is I live in West End and I actually just was there speaking to the council. We haven't resolved West End. And West End, as I found out, I cleaned up the water mess. I got Jefferson Parish to trim the trees that are on their side of those 4 acres. I really want to put a bike path in there that connects Jefferson Parish, which is my district, would run all the way there and connect it to the lakefront. Right now, it's sitting there derelict since Hurricane George, 25 years, and it hasn't been addressed. And I'm finding out that the state really had FEMA money. They could have repaired the wall. And the road that's there, Breakwater Drive, could be the bike path that connects you out to go out to ride your bike out to the point. We've had people talk about putting pickleball there. Rather than look to put 4 more bars, and the studies have come back that says, we're saturated with bars and restaurants out here. They already regrouped. Let's make this. We lost Coconut Beach. The New Orleans master plan calls for saving trees and recreation and not losing green space. So rather than lose the green space of what's called West End Lakeshore Park, I would say we're going to get that money from the state, clean it up, and put it back in plan. It would take about 30 days, just like fixing the valves for the water. So one of the things I would say, we're going to add recreation. It's a great place. People come there from all over the city, actually, to see the sunsets. We don't need to pour more concrete out here.
Okay.
Other issues I've listed, again, I want to work on the property tax bill. I think that's a great solution to help it with insurance. And we obviously know that the flooding and sewage and water board needs help. So those would be where I would focus my energy to benefit New Orleans.
Okay. Well, I got nothing else on it. Thank you for your time today. I think it's been very informative. I think this will go a long way to kind of getting people to get a picture of who you are and who your candidacy is and what your candidacy is. And I thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it.
JP, I think what your outreach has been very strong, and I appreciate your term on the council and what you've gotten done. You've taken, like I said, some things that needed to be addressed and not been afraid of ruffling the feathers or using a couple of those sticks of dynamite you must have at your house. So thank you for what you've done for New Orleans.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail.
All right.